In the year 2178, humans were not the strongest people in the galaxy. They were not the richest, or the most advanced, or the most feared. Among the great powers of the stars, Earth was seen as a small, new nation that had only just learned to walk. Many old empires looked at humans the way a grown man looks at a child. They smiled at them. They were polite to them, but they did not respect them. The biggest of these old empires was called the Krillian Empire. It had existed for over 2,000 years. It ruled more than 400 star systems. Its fleets were huge, its cities were built from living metal, and its emperor was called a god by his own people. The Krillian Empire had eaten many smaller nations over the centuries, the way a big fish eats small fish. It had never lost a war. It had never been humbled. It believed it would rule the stars forever. Earth had joined the wider galactic community only 50 years earlier, after humans built their first working faster-than-light engine. Since then, humans had grown fast. Too fast, some said. But even so, next to the Krillian Empire, Earth looked like nothing. A small blue dot with a handful of colony worlds and a fleet that could be swallowed whole by a single Krillian battle group. What the Krillian Empire did not know, and what almost no one else in the galaxy knew either, was that Earth had built something no other nation had ever built before. It was not a weapon. It was not a shield. It was a machine that could see the future. Not perfectly, not like magic, but close enough to matter. Deep under a mountain in a quiet part of Earth, in a facility with no name on any public map, a team of scientists and mathematicians had spent 30 years building a system they called the Ascendancy Model. It was not one computer, but thousands of them, linked together, fed with data from every corner of known space. Trade records, military movements, political speeches, birth rates, grain harvests, old letters between diplomats, secret reports bought from spies, weather patterns on 1,000 worlds. All of it poured into the machine, year after year, decade after decade. The Ascendancy Model did one thing, and it did it better than anything else in the galaxy. It predicted the future of nations, not the future of one man, or one battle, or one day. It predicted which empires would grow strong, and which empires would grow weak, and when, and why. It could not tell you who would win a single fight, but it could tell you, with frightening accuracy, which great powers would still be standing in 50 years, and which ones would have crumbled into dust. The woman who led this project was named Dr. Elena Reyes. She was in her 50s. With gray hair she never bothered to dye, and eyes that missed nothing. She had given her whole life to this machine. She had missed her daughter's wedding because of it. She had slept in her office more nights than she could count, and on a cold morning in March, she stood in front of a wall of screens, looking at numbers that made her hands go cold. The Ascendancy Model had just finished a new run. It had been given fresh data about the Krillian Empire, gathered secretly over many years by human traders and diplomats who did not even know they were spies. And the machine had reached a conclusion. The Krillian Empire, the largest and oldest power in known space, the empire that had never lost a war, was going to fall. Not might fall, would fall. The model gave it a little more than 40 years before its central government collapsed, its colonies broke away, and its once mighty fleets turned against each other in a long and bloody civil war. Elena stared at the numbers for a long time before she picked up her phone. "Mara," she said, "you need to come down here, and you need to bring the director." Mara Lynn arrived within the hour. She was the head of Earth's small but very effective intelligence service, a woman who looked more like a schoolteacher than a spy chief, which was exactly why she was so good at her job. Behind her walked Director Aaron Kessler, the civilian head of the whole Ascendancy project, a tired-looking man who had once been a history professor before Earth's government pulled him into this secret world. Elena showed them the data. She showed them the trade routes drying up. She showed them the corruption creeping through the Krillian nobility, generation after generation, like rot spreading through wood. She showed them the overstretched borders, the rebellious colonies far from the capital, the slow but steady decline in new ideas and new technology. Because a society that has not lost a war in 1,000 years stops trying to improve. She showed them the numbers on population growth in the outer Krillian systems, numbers that did not match the numbers coming from the glittering, image-heavy reports Krillian officials like to publish. "It's real," Elena said quietly. "The model is almost never wrong about something this big." The Krillian Empire is dying, it just doesn't know it yet. Mara folded her arms and studied the star map glowing on the wall. 400 systems marked in gold, all of them belonging to an empire that looked, on the surface, like it would rule forever. Nobody else knows this, she said. Not the Krillians, not their rivals, not the Concord Council. Nobody but us. Nobody but us, Elena agreed. Director Kessler rubbed his eyes. That's not just data anymore, he said. That's a weapon. Maybe the most powerful weapon humanity has ever built, and we can't fire it. If we tell the galaxy what we know, the Krillians will either laugh at us or destroy us before we can prove it. If we keep it secret and do nothing, it doesn't help us at all. There was a long silence in the room. Then Mara Lynn, who had spent 20 years thinking about problems exactly like this one, began to smile. Maybe, she said slowly. We don't need to fire it ourselves. What do you mean? Elena asked. I mean, said Mara, what if we let someone steal it? Far away, in the heart of the Krillian Empire, on a golden-domed world called Krillis Prime, a very different kind of meeting was happening. The Emperor, Vorn Krill, sat upon a throne carved from a single black crystal, said to have been mined from the heart of a dead star. He was old, older than any human alive, his skin pale gold, his eyes a deep and ancient purple. He had ruled for over 300 years, and in all that time, he had never once doubted that his empire would last forever. Before him stood his grand strategist, a sharp-eyed Krillian named Balak Ren, who had the difficult job of bringing the Emperor bad news without making the Emperor angry. Speak, said the Emperor. My Emperor, said Balak Ren, bowing low. Our agents on the border worlds report troubling rumors from the small human nation known as Earth. The Emperor's purple eyes narrowed slightly. The children, he said, using the word many Krillians used for humans, half in mockery. What have the children done now? They have built something, my Emperor, a machine, hidden deep beneath their homeworld. Our spies do not fully understand its purpose, but we have intercepted fragments of communication that suggest it is some kind of map, a very detailed map of military strength across many empires, including our own. The Emperor sat forward slightly. In a galaxy of endless competition, information about an enemy's true strength was more valuable than gold, more valuable than starships, more valuable, almost than anything else. A map of my empire's strength, the Emperor said. Made by children who have only had starflight for 50 years. It seems unlikely, my Emperor, Balak Ren admitted, but our sources are usually reliable. They say the humans call it the ascendancy model. They say it predicts which empires will rise and which will fall. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, a low, rolling laugh that echoed through the throne room. Let me guess, he said. This little map shows that the great Krillian Empire, the empire that has never lost a war in 2,000 years, will rise forever and rule the stars without end. Is that what the children believe? Balak Ren hesitated, choosing his words with great care. We do not know what the map shows, my Emperor. That is precisely the problem. We do not know. The Emperor's smile faded slowly. This was true. Not knowing was dangerous. An empire that had ruled for 2,000 years had not done so by ignoring dangerous unknowns. Then find out, the Emperor said at last. I do not care if these humans are children playing with toys they do not understand, or if they have truly built something worth fearing. Either way, I want to see this map with my own eyes. Send our best. Steal it. Bring it to me. Balak Ren bowed low. It will be done, my Emperor. The Krillian Empire's finest spy was not Krillian at all. His name was Thex Moore, and he belonged to a smaller race called the Velen, a people who had been conquered by the Krillians 300 years earlier, and had, over time, become some of the Empire's most loyal and most skilled servants. Thex was tall and thin, with gray-blue skin and large dark eyes that could see in almost total darkness. He had spent 40 years working in the shadows of the Empire's intelligence service, and he had never once failed a mission. He was given the file on Earth 2 days after the Emperor's order was passed down through the chain of command. He read it in a single sitting, sitting alone in a small, quiet room, with a single light above his head. Earth, a young nation, weak fleets, simple technology, by Krillian standards. A people who still argued loudly with each other about how to run their own small planet, let alone the stars. On paper, it looked like an easy job, almost too easy. But Thex Moore had lived a long time, and he had learned one important lesson in all his years of spying. The jobs that looked easy were often the ones that hid the most danger. He requested 3 months to prepare. His superiors gave him 6 weeks. He spent those 6 weeks studying everything human, their languages, their history, their strange and messy politics, so different from the calm, controlled order of the Krillian court. He studied their technology, their starships, their weapons, their security systems. He learned that humans, unlike many races, did not put all their trust in machines. They still used human guards, human soldiers, human judgment, at every important post. This made them harder to fool with simple tricks, but it also made them, in Thex's professional opinion, unpredictable. Unpredictable people made mistakes. Mistakes could be used. He built a false identity, a traitor from a neutral system, carrying goods that Earth's markets wanted. It took him 3 weeks just to get a legal reason to travel near Earth space, and another 2 weeks to get permission to land on Earth itself, in a quiet port city that welcomed traders from many worlds. He did not know, as his small trade ship slipped into orbit above the blue and green planet below, that he was walking directly into a trap that had been built especially for him. Elena Reyes did not know the name Thex Moore. She did not know what he looked like, or which ship he flew, or which day he would arrive. But she knew, because Mara Lynn's spies had told her that the Krillian Empire had ordered its intelligence service to find and steal Earth's secret map, and she knew that a skilled agent would soon be on his way. "We can't make it too easy," Mara said, during one of their planning meetings, 3 weeks before Thex Moore's ship reached Earth orbit. "If it's too easy, they'll suspect a trap. We need it to look hard. We need it to look like they truly won something by beating us." "But not too hard," added Director Kessler. "If it's impossible, they'll give up, or they'll send in a whole army, and that we cannot afford." Elena had spent her whole life building things meant to be understood, not things meant to trick people. This new kind of work did not come naturally to her, but she was smart enough to learn fast, and she had good teachers in Mara Lynn's small team of quiet, careful professionals. Together, they built a version of the Ascendancy model's core data, a copy that looked completely real, protected by security systems that looked completely real, guarded by human staff who had no idea they were part of a plan at all. Only a handful of people on the entire planet knew the truth. The truth was this: the copy that would be stolen was almost exactly the same as the real thing. The predictions in it were true. The data in it was true. There was only one difference, hidden deep inside the code, a difference that would only matter much, much later. "Let them take it," Mara said, on the night before Thex Moore's ship was due to land. "Let them take it home. Let them show it to their emperor. Let them read, with their own eyes, exactly how their empire is going to die." Elena looked at the star map on the wall, at the golden marks of 400 Krillian systems, an empire so large it seemed impossible that it could ever fall. "And then what?" she asked quietly. Mara Lynn's smile was thin and sharp. "Then," she said, "we watch what an empire does to itself, once it finally understands that it is not going to live forever." Outside, in the dark sky above the quiet port city, a single unmarked trade ship began its slow, careful descent toward the surface of Earth. On board, Thex Moore checked his equipment one final time, unaware that every step of his coming mission had already been planned for, watched, and prepared, by people he had been trained to see as nothing more than children playing at being a nation among the stars. He was about to steal a map that would change the fate of his entire empire. He had no idea that Earth wanted him to take it. Thex Moore's ship landed at Haven Port, a busy trading city on Earth's eastern coast, on a warm evening in late spring. From the outside, the port looked like any other trading hub in the galaxy. Cargo ships from a dozen worlds sitting in long rows, workers of many species moving crates back and forth, the smell of fuel and food mixing together in the warm air. Thex walked down the ramp of his ship wearing the plain clothes of a trader, carrying nothing that would draw attention, and let himself blend into the noisy crowd. He had 6 weeks. His cover story was simple. He was a trader from a neutral system, here to arrange a shipment of rare earth minerals used in Krillian shipbuilding. It was a real business, one that really existed, which made his story easy to check and easy to believe. Nobody looked twice at him. This was exactly how he liked it. For the first 2 weeks, Thex did nothing that looked like spying at all. He met with real merchants. He signed real contracts. He walked through the city markets, learned the rhythms of human daily life, listened to the way people talked, laughed, argued. He was patient. Patience was the difference between spies who succeeded and spies who were caught. Slowly, carefully, he began to ask small questions. A word here, a rumor there. He let it be known, quietly, among certain people in Haven Port who were willing to sell information for the right price, that he was interested in Earth's defense research, not directly. Never directly. He simply let the right people know that money was available for the right kind of talk. Within 10 days, a name reached his ears that made him sit very still in his rented room, staring at the wall for a long time. The Ascendancy Model. It was the same name from his briefing file. Whispers only, nothing solid, but the whispers were consistent. A hidden research site, somewhere inland, protected by Earth's small but capable intelligence service. A machine that predicted the future of nations. Some people who spoke of it did not believe it was real. Others swore it was the most important secret on the whole planet. Thex began, very carefully, to follow the trail. What Thex Moore did not know was that almost every lead he found had been placed there on purpose. Mara Lin's people had spent weeks preparing the ground before his ship had even entered Earth's solar system. They knew, from long study of Krillian intelligence methods, exactly how a Krillian spy would search for information. Through informants, through small bribes, through patient listening in the right taverns and trade houses. So they built a trail of breadcrumbs, planted among real information brokers who did not know they were being used, each piece leading a little closer to the truth, each piece requiring just enough effort to feel earned. "He's good," Mara said one evening, watching a report on her screen that showed Thex Moore's movements through the city, pieced together from a dozen small observations. "Careful, patient. He hasn't made a single mistake yet." "Is that a problem?" Elena asked. She had come to Mara's office more and more often in recent weeks, drawn by a mixture of worry and curiosity about a kind of work she did not fully understand. "No," said Mara, "it's exactly what we want. A careless spy might get caught by accident, and then the Krillians would know something was wrong. A good spy who thinks he is succeeding through his own skill will trust what he finds completely. He won't look for a trap, because in his mind, he's the one setting the trap." Elena watched the screen a while longer. "Do you ever feel bad about this?" she asked. "Tricking someone this way?" Mara considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. "He's not a bad man, probably," she said. "He's doing his job, the same way you and I are doing ours. But his empire has hurt a lot of people over a very long time, Elena. If what we're doing here saves lives, even lives on the other side, I can live with a few tricks." By the 4th week, Thex Moore had found what he believed was the location of the Ascendancy Model, a research facility built into a mountain range far from any major city, officially registered as a geological survey station. He spent several days studying it from a distance, using small hidden devices to watch the patterns of guards, the timing of supply deliveries, the shift changes of the staff. The security looked real, because it was real. Human guards walked real patrols, real cameras watched real hallways, real locks protected real doors. Everything Thex observed matched what a serious, important research facility would actually look like. This was important, because Mara Lin's team had decided early on that fake security was more dangerous than real security handled carefully. A skilled spy could smell a fake a mile away, but a real facility, with real protocols, simply given one carefully hidden weakness, would fool even the best professional. The weakness Mara's team had built was small and specific. Once every 10 days, a maintenance team from a private contractor came to service the facility's cooling systems, since the massive computer banks of the Ascendancy Model generated enormous heat and needed constant care. This maintenance team was real. Their badges were real. Their schedule was public record, filed with local authorities as required by law. But their final security check, on the very last day of their 10-day cycle, had a 15-minute gap in coverage, a gap caused by nothing more dramatic than an old habit among the guards of taking a short break at shift change. It took Thex Moore 3 careful weeks of watching to find that 15-minute gap. He felt, when he finally saw it, the quiet satisfaction of a professional who has done difficult work well. He did not know that the gap had been placed there specifically for him to find, by people who had studied exactly how a patient watcher works and exactly how long it would take him to notice. He sent word back to Krillis Prime that he had identified his opportunity. He requested one more week to prepare his entry. He was given 4 days. On the night Thexmore made his move, the sky above the mountain research station was clear and full of stars, the same stars that, unknown to him, held an empire slowly rotting from the inside. He wore a maintenance uniform, copied carefully from photographs taken during weeks of surveillance. He carried tools that matched what a real technician would carry, along with a small, specially built device designed to copy data from Earth computer systems without triggering alarms. He moved through the 15-minute gap with the calm confidence of a man who had done this kind of work many times before. Inside the facility, the halls were quiet. The lighting was dim, set for the night shift. Thex moved past rooms he had memorized from stolen blueprints that had, in fact, been quietly leaked to him 3 weeks earlier, through one of his paid informants, an informant who did not know she was working for Earth intelligence the entire time. He reached the central data room without incident. Inside, banks of humming machines stretched from floor to ceiling, their lights blinking in slow, steady patterns. This was, as far as Thexmore could tell, exactly what his briefing had described, the heart of the ascendancy model. He connected his device to the nearest terminal and began the copy. It took 11 minutes. 11 long minutes in which Thexmore stood perfectly still, listening for footsteps, watching the small progress display on his device, his heart beating faster than he would ever have admitted to anyone. This was the moment every spy feared and lived for at the same time, the moment when success or failure hung on nothing but silence and time. At the 11-minute mark, the device gave a soft, quiet chime. The copy was complete. Thexmore disconnected the device, slipped it into a hidden pocket, and walked calmly back out through the halls, through the 15-minute gap, which had, by pure and careful timing, exactly 6 minutes left before it closed. He reached the tree line outside the facility, removed his stolen uniform, and disappeared into the dark forest, where a small hidden transport waited to carry him back toward Haven Port. He did not look back. He did not know that, 3 floors below the room he had just robbed, in a small monitoring station with soundproofed walls, Elena Reyes and Mara Lynn had watched every second of his theft on a bank of hidden screens, and had said nothing, and done nothing, because nothing was exactly what they wanted to do. "He's out," Mara said quietly, as the last camera feed showed Thexmore vanishing into the trees. Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "That's it then," she said. "It's done." "It's done," Mara agreed. "Now we wait." Thexmore left Earth 2 days later, his cover story of finished mineral contracts giving him a clean and unremarkable reason to depart. He did not send word ahead of his success, following standard procedure to avoid any risk of the message being intercepted. He simply flew, alone, back toward the heart of the Krillian Empire, carrying in a small hidden device, what he believed to be the most important secret Earth possessed. The journey took 11 days. Thex spent much of it thinking about what he had stolen, turning the mission over and over in his mind, the way he always did after a successful job, looking for anything he might have missed, any small mistake that could come back to hurt him later. He found nothing. The mission had gone almost perfectly, too perfectly. A small and quiet voice in the back of his mind whispered, but he pushed the thought aside. He was tired. He was allowed to feel proud of good work. When his ship finally entered orbit above Krillis Prime, he was met not by a low-level handler, as was usual after most missions, but by 3 senior officers from the Imperial Intelligence Service itself, waiting for him at the private landing platform, reserved for matters of the highest importance. "The Grand Strategist wants this data immediately," one of the officers told him, taking the small device from his hands with visible urgency. "The Emperor himself has asked to be informed the moment it is confirmed." Thexmore watched them carry his stolen prize away toward the palace, and felt, for the first time in many years of quiet, careful work, a small and unfamiliar flicker of unease. He did not yet know why. He would understand within a matter of days. The data was taken directly to a secure chamber, deep within the Imperial Palace. a room reserved for the Empire's most sensitive analysis, guarded by soldiers who had served the throne for generations. Balak Ren himself oversaw the process, standing behind a team of the Empire's finest analysts as they carefully, methodically, began to unpack and study what Thex Moore had brought home. It took 3 full days to properly translate the human data into forms the Krillian analysts could read and understand. Human mathematics were not identical to Krillian mathematics, though the two systems overlapped enough that skilled analysts could bridge the gap. Balak Ren watched impatiently as his best minds worked through the night, translating numbers, decoding graphs, slowly building a picture of what this strange human machine had actually predicted. On the 3rd night, one of his senior analysts, a quiet and careful woman named Dessa Van, who had served the Empire faithfully for over 60 years, called Balak Ren to her station, with a voice that shook slightly. "Grand strategist," she said, "I believe you need to see this yourself." Balak Ren walked to her terminal and looked at the screen she had prepared. On it was a graph, simple and clear, even to eyes unfamiliar with human number systems, showing the projected strength of every major galactic power over the coming century. Most lines rose and fell in small, gentle waves, the normal rhythm of nations growing and shrinking over time. One line was different. One line began high, near the very top of the graph, representing an empire larger and older and more powerful than any other shown. And that line, slowly at first, then faster and faster, curved downward, falling and falling, until, somewhere around the 40th year of the projection, it dropped almost to nothing at all. Beside that falling line, in Krillian script that the human machine had somehow correctly translated, was a single word: Krillis. Balak Ren stood very still for a long moment, staring at the graph, at his own empire's future laid bare and unflinching before him, an empire that had never known defeat now shown, by the calculations of a nation not yet 100 years old among the stars, to be quietly, steadily, and certainly dying. "Does the Emperor know?" he finally asked, his voice very quiet. "Not yet, Grand Strategist," said Dessa Van. "We wanted you to see it first." Balak Ren looked at the falling line one more time, and felt, for the first time in his long career of loyal service, genuine and complete fear. "Bring me everything," he said. "Every detail. Every number. I need to understand this before I decide what the Emperor must be told, and how." Outside the secure chamber, far beyond the golden domes of Krillis Prime, the stars continued to burn as they always had, indifferent to the quiet panic beginning to spread through the highest levels of the oldest and proudest empire in known space. Balak Ren did not sleep that night. He sat alone in his private study, surrounded by printed copies of the human data, reading and rereading numbers he wished with all his heart were wrong. The ascendancy model did not simply say that the Krillian Empire would fall. It explained why, in patient, careful detail, the way a doctor explains a sickness to a patient who does not yet understand how ill they truly are. It showed the slow rot in the outer colonies, worlds far from the capital, where local governors had grown fat and lazy on tribute money, spending fortunes on palaces while roads crumbled and hospitals closed. It showed the Empire's fleet, magnificent on parade but aging in truth, its shipyards producing fewer and fewer new vessels each year, because the nobles who controlled those shipyards found it more profitable to sell metal to private buyers than to build ships for a war nobody believed would ever come. It showed something Balak Ren found hardest of all to accept, that the Empire's greatest strength, its long, unbroken history of victory, had become its greatest weakness. A nation that has not lost a war in 2,000 years stops preparing for the possibility of losing. It stops training new tacticians. It stops questioning old plans. It grows comfortable, and comfort, the human machine calculated with cold and patient logic, was often the first quiet step toward collapse. By morning, Balak Ren had made his decision. He would show this to the Emperor. Not because he wanted to, because he had sworn, many years ago, to serve the Empire honestly, and an empire that did not know the truth about itself could not be saved from what was coming. The Emperor received the report in his private chambers, away from the eyes of court. Balak Ren stood before him, the graph glowing on a screen between them, and explained, as carefully and gently as he could, what the human data showed. Emperor Vorn Krill listened in complete silence. He had ruled for 300 years. He had seen wars, rebellions, plagues, and disasters, and had guided his empire through all of them with calm and unshaken confidence. But as he looked at the falling line on the screen, something in his ancient purple eyes changed, something Balak Ren had never seen there before. Fear. "This is Earth's work?" the Emperor finally asked. "A nation not yet 100 years old among the stars has calculated the death of an empire 2,000 years in the making?" "It appears so, my Emperor," said Balak Ren. "Our analysts have checked the data 3 times. The mathematics, though built on human methods, are sound, where we can compare their models' predictions against events that have already happened. In other nations, in the past, the model is correct far more often than chance would allow." The Emperor rose from his seat and walked to the wide window of his chamber, looking out over the golden spires of Kryllus Prime, a city that had stood, unconquered, for 2,000 years. "Who else has seen this?" he asked without turning around. "Only myself and the small analysis team who translated the data, my Emperor, all of them sworn to silence under penalty of death." "Good," said the Emperor. "It must stay that way. If word of this spreads, panic will follow. Panic in the colonies. Panic among the nobles. Panic in the fleet. An empire that believes it is dying often dies faster simply because it believes it." Balak Ren hesitated before speaking again. "My Emperor, if I may. Perhaps the correct response is not silence, but action. The model does not simply predict our fall. It explains its causes. If we understand the causes, perhaps we can address them. Perhaps this terrible gift, stolen from Earth, could become the very thing that saves us, if we act on its warning, rather than hide from it." The Emperor turned back to face him, and for a long moment, said nothing at all. "Perhaps," he finally said, "or perhaps it becomes the very thing that destroys us, once the wrong people learn what it says. Tell me, Balak Ren, if you were a nobleman on a distant colony world, already tempted to break away from a crumbling empire, and you learned with certainty that the empire was already dying, what would you do? Would you stay loyal to a sinking ship, or would you save yourself while there was still time?" Balak Ren did not answer, because he did not have a good answer to give. "Keep this contained," the Emperor said at last. "For now, I need time to think. But secrets, even in a palace guarded by soldiers who had served the throne for generations, have a way of finding cracks to slip through." Dessa Van, the analyst who had first discovered the falling line, was a loyal servant of the Empire. But she was also a mother, and her son served as a young officer in the Imperial fleet, stationed on a distant border world called Farron's Reach. 3 nights after showing Balak Ren the data, unable to bear the weight of what she knew alone, she sent her son a message, careful and coded, but clear enough for a mother to say to a child, "Come home if you can, while you still have the chance, because the empire we love may not last as long as we always believed." Her son did not fully understand the message, but he was young and worried, and he mentioned it, quietly, to a fellow officer he trusted, a woman named Sela Dran, who came from a wealthy noble family with connections across a dozen border systems. Sela Dran did not dismiss the strange warning. She had grown up hearing her family whisper, for years, about troubles in the empire that the official reports never mentioned: shrinking harvests, restless colonies, a fleet that looked stronger on paper than it truly was. The message from her friend's mother fit into a pattern she had already half suspected. She wrote to her own family, carefully, asking what they knew. Within 2 weeks, whispers of the falling line and the human map had begun spreading, quietly but steadily, among certain noble families across the empire, families with the wealth and the connections to act on dangerous information long before ordinary citizens ever heard a word of it. Balak Ren discovered the leak 3 weeks after it began, when a report reached him of unusual financial activity. Several noble families, on worlds far from the capital, quietly moving their fortunes into private accounts on neutral, non-Kryllian systems. It was the kind of thing wealthy families did when they no longer trusted the future of the nation they lived in. He brought the report to the Emperor immediately, his face pale with worry. "It has already begun," he said. "The secret is spreading. I do not yet know how far." Far away, on Earth, Elena Reyes and Mara Lynn received their own reports, gathered slowly and carefully by a small network of human traders and diplomats who moved through Krillian space without drawing much attention. Exactly the kind of people nobody important ever suspected of watching closely. Money is moving, Mara said, reading from a datapad in her office, late one evening. Noble families near the border are shifting wealth off Krillian systems. Small amounts, at first, careful amounts, but it's spreading. 6 families 2 weeks ago, 19 families now. Elena sat across from her, watching the numbers with a strange, complicated feeling in her chest. She had spent 30 years building a machine to understand the future, but she had never truly imagined what it would feel like to watch that future begin, slowly and quietly, to come true. They believe it, Elena said softly. The Krillians believe their own empire is dying. Some of them do, Mara said. Enough of them, it seems, to start protecting themselves instead of protecting their nation. That's exactly the pattern the model predicted, isn't it? Not a sudden fall, a slow one, made faster by everyone who stops believing and starts running. Director Kessler, who had joined them for the evening briefing, looked troubled. Are we comfortable with this? He asked. We built a tool to understand the future. We did not build it to cause a war, or a famine, or the collapse of an entire civilization filled with people who never did anything to us personally. Mara considered his words carefully before answering. The Krillian Empire has conquered 43 nations in the last 1,000 years, she said. Some of those nations still exist, as colonies stripped of their own governments and their own voices. We are not causing anything, Aaron. We only showed them a mirror. What they do with what they see in that mirror is their choice, not ours. And if their choice is to lash out, Kessler asked. If a wounded animal, cornered and afraid, decides to attack the nearest small nation it can blame for its pain, we are the nearest small nation, Mara. We are the ones who stole nothing and gave them everything. And if they decide Earth is the cause of their troubles instead of themselves, we will be the ones who pay for it. The room fell quiet. It was, Elena realized, the exact question that had worried her from the very first night she had seen the falling line on her own screens, months before Thex Moore had ever set foot on Earth. That's why we need to be ready, Mara finally said. Not just to watch, to prepare. If this becomes a storm, Earth needs to be far from where it lands, or strong enough to survive it if it doesn't. Back on Krillis Prime, the Emperor called a private council meeting, gathering only his most trusted advisors, away from the wider court, away from the ears of nobles who might already know more than they should. We must decide, the Emperor said, standing before his small circle of trusted ministers, how to face what is coming. We can no longer pretend the secret is contained. It is spreading, family by family, whisper by whisper, and soon it will reach the common people, and the border colonies, and our rivals beyond the Empire's edge, who would very much enjoy watching us fall apart from within. We could deny it, suggested one minister, an old and cautious man named Ur Krill, a distant cousin of the Emperor himself, who held the title of High Cardinal and led the Empire's official religious council. Declare the human map a forgery, a trick, designed to weaken us. Punish anyone caught spreading the rumor. Denial has not worked so far, Balak Ren said carefully. The families who are moving their money do not need to believe a rumor. They have seen the actual data, or trusted reports from those who have. Denial will only make us look weak and frightened, hiding from a truth we cannot control. Then what? The Emperor asked. What do you suggest, Grand Strategist? Balak Ren took a slow breath. He had thought about little else for weeks. I suggest the truth, he said. Not the whole truth, offered all at once, which would cause exactly the panic we fear. But a careful truth. Tell the Empire that our analysts have identified certain weaknesses, certain dangers to our long-term strength, and that the Emperor himself is taking bold new action to address them. Give the people a reason to believe the Empire is not dying, but changing, reforming, growing stronger, not weaker, because it finally faces its problems honestly, instead of hiding from them. The Emperor considered this for a long time, his ancient eyes moving slowly around the circle of advisors who had served him faithfully for so many years. And if reform comes too late? He finally asked. If the rot has already spread too deep to cut out cleanly? Nobody in the room had an answer to that question. Outside, beyond the golden domes of the capital, on 100 worlds and more, wealthy families continued quietly moving their fortunes to safer ground. Colonial governors began quietly strengthening their own private armies, and a whisper that had started as 3 words spoken by a worried mother to her son continued spreading, slowly but surely, through the vast and ancient body of an empire that had never once, in 2,000 years, believed it could fall. It was beginning to believe it now. The emperor's plan of careful, controlled truth lasted almost 2 months before it began to fall apart. At first, it seemed to work. Imperial broadcasts spoke of new reforms, new investments in the border colonies, new investigations into corruption among the noble governors. The emperor himself appeared before the people, calm and strong as always, promising a new age of Krillian strength. For a while, the whispers quieted. Many citizens, comforted by the emperor's confident voice, put the strange rumors out of their minds. But reform, it turned out, was much harder to deliver than to promise. The corruption Balak Ren had promised to root out was not held by a few bad individuals who could simply be arrested and replaced. It was woven through the entire system, generation after generation, family after family, until half the noble houses of the empire had some hand in the very problems the reforms were meant to fix. Every attempt to remove a corrupt governor was met with fierce resistance from that governor's family, friends, and business partners, many of whom held powerful positions in the imperial court itself. Every investigation slowed, was delayed, was quietly buried under mountains of paperwork and old favors owed. Balak Ren worked 18 hours a day, pushing as hard as he could against a system that did not want to change. He removed 3 corrupt governors in the first month. He was blocked from removing a 4th by a coalition of noble families who threatened, quietly but clearly, to withdraw their support from the throne entirely, if he pushed further. "They do not understand," he told the emperor, exhausted, late one night. "Or perhaps they understand perfectly well, and simply do not care. They believe the empire's fall, if it comes, is still 40 years away. 40 years is enough time for them to enjoy their wealth, and let their grandchildren deal with the consequences. They are not thinking of the empire, they are thinking only of themselves." The emperor, who had ruled long enough to understand exactly this kind of selfishness, felt something close to despair for the first time in 300 years. "Then we are already lost," he said quietly. "If my own nobles will not save themselves, how can I possibly save them?" While the reforms struggled in the capital, the border colonies began to move on their own. Farron's Reach, the distant world where Dessa Van's son served in the fleet, was among the first to act. Its governor, a proud and ambitious woman named Kael Vosh, had heard the rumors of the falling empire many weeks before official word ever reached her world. She did not wait for imperial reforms that might never arrive. Instead, she began quietly building her own private fleet, using local tax money that was supposed to be sent to the capital, and began forging trade agreements with neighboring systems outside official imperial channels. When imperial inspectors finally arrived to question her, months later, they found a colony that looked, in almost every practical way, like an independent nation already. Governor Vosh met them politely, showed them official-looking paperwork explaining every questionable decision, and privately made clear, through trusted advisors, that Farron's Reach would resist any attempt to force it back into full imperial control. She was not alone. Across the outer colonies, similar stories began to unfold. Some governors moved slowly and carefully, building independence through quiet negotiation and legal loopholes. Others moved fast and openly, declaring new laws, new taxes, new militias, daring the distant and distracted capital to stop them. The empire, which had ruled without serious challenge for 2,000 years, suddenly found itself trying to hold together dozens of small fires at once, each one demanding attention, resources, and soldiers it did not have enough of to spare. Balak Ren watched the reports pile up on his desk, with a growing, sick feeling of recognition. This was exactly what the human machine had predicted, not a single dramatic battle that could be won or lost in one day, but 1,000 small cracks, appearing all at once, each one too small to seem urgent on its own, but together forming a pattern that no army, however large, could easily fix. "We are watching the model come true in front of our own eyes," he told the emperor. "Every week, exactly as the human machine predicted, weaker in 100 small ways, instead of broken in one large way. I do not know how to fight an enemy like this, my emperor. There is no fleet to destroy. There is no single battle to win. There is only decay, everywhere, all at once. On Earth, Elena Reyes and Mara Lynn followed these events with careful, quiet attention, watching reports gathered by their small network of traders and diplomats scattered throughout Krillian space. "It's working faster than the model predicted," Elena said one evening, studying the latest reports. "The original projection gave the Empire 40 years before serious collapse. At this rate, some of the border colonies could be functionally independent within 2 or 3 years. Because we sped it up," Mara said. "The model predicted the Empire's fall based on its own internal weaknesses, playing out naturally over decades. But once the nobles learned the fall was coming, many of them stopped trying to prevent it and started trying to survive it instead. Fear became its own kind of fuel." Director Kessler looked troubled, as he often did during these evening briefings. "This is what worried me from the beginning," he said. "We didn't just show them a mirror, Mara. We handed a match to a house already full of dry wood, and now we're standing here calmly discussing how fast it's burning." "What would you have had us do instead?" Mara asked, not unkindly, but firmly. "Say nothing? Let the Empire continue exactly as it was, conquering nations, crushing rebellions, growing stronger, while every small nation nearby, including our own, lived forever in its shadow? The Empire was always going to fall, Aaron. The model didn't create that truth. It only revealed it. What we did was give that truth a chance to matter sooner, while there are still people alive who can build something better out of the pieces, instead of leaving it to some future generation who might never get the chance." Elena, who had listened quietly through most of this argument, finally spoke. "There's something else we haven't talked about," she said. "The model didn't just predict the Empire's fall. It predicted what usually comes after, in situations like this. Sometimes a falling empire breaks into many smaller, more reasonable nations, and things improve for the ordinary people who live there. But sometimes it breaks into war. Civil war, fought between former colonies and old loyalists and ambitious generals, a war that can last for generations and kill far more people than the Empire's original conquests ever did." The room went quiet. "So which one is it going to be?" Kessler finally asked. "For the Krillian Empire? Which future are we watching unfold?" Elena looked back at the data on her screen. The same kind of careful, patient numbers that had first shown her the falling line so many months before. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "The model gives probabilities, not certainties. Right now, it's close. Too close to call. It might depend on choices that haven't been made yet. Choices by people we've never met, on worlds we've never seen." "Then maybe," Mara said slowly, "it's time we stopped just watching and started helping tip the balance toward the better outcome, instead of leaving it entirely to chance." Mara's suggestion, once brought before Earth's small governing council, responsible for matters this sensitive, led to weeks of careful, quiet debate. Some council members agreed strongly with her. If Earth had the knowledge and the ability to help steer a collapsing empire toward a peaceful transformation, instead of a bloody civil war, did they not have some responsibility to try? Others argued just as strongly against involvement. Earth was still small, still weak compared to the great powers of the galaxy, and openly interfering in Krillian affairs, even with good intentions, risked drawing dangerous attention to a young nation that could not yet defend itself against serious retaliation. In the end, a careful middle path was chosen. Earth would not openly involve itself in Krillian politics, but through quiet, deniable channels, using the same network of traders and diplomats who had gathered information for months, Earth began offering small, careful pieces of help to the parties within the Empire, who seemed most likely to guide events toward peaceful change, rather than violent collapse. Balak Ren, without ever knowing the true source, began receiving anonymous reports through trusted intermediaries, reports that offered surprisingly clear analysis of which colonial governors could still be reasoned with, and which had already decided on full independence no matter what concessions were offered. Governor Vosh of Farron's Reach, without knowing why, found trade opportunities with new, distant partners appearing at exactly the moments her fragile young colony most needed them, opportunities that made peaceful negotiation with the Empire look more appealing than open rebellion. Dessa Van's son, still serving in the fleet, found himself transferred, through paperwork nobody could quite trace back to its source, away from a border posting that would have placed him directly in the path of a coming conflict, and toward a quieter post, where his mother's family connections and his own growing understanding of the Empire's troubles might one day prove useful in calmer, more careful hands. None of it was dramatic. None of it looked, from any single angle, like the work of a hidden hand guiding events. That was exactly the point. Mara Lin had learned, over many years, that the most powerful kind of influence was the kind nobody ever noticed. Small nudges offered at exactly the right moment, never forceful enough to draw suspicion, but together forming a pattern, invisible from any single vantage point, guiding a falling empire, one small decision at a time, away from its darkest possible future. "We're not saving them," Mara told Elena during one of their late-night discussions, months into this quiet, careful work. "Let's be honest about that. We can't save an empire built on 2,000 years of conquest and corruption from itself. But maybe, if we're patient, and careful, and lucky, we can help make sure that what comes after them is a little less bloody than it might have been otherwise." "And what comes after, for Earth?" Elena asked. "What happens to us? Once the greatest power in known space finishes falling apart, right in our own neighborhood of the galaxy?" Mara looked at the star map on her office wall, at the golden marks of Krillian systems, some of them already beginning to shift color in her latest reports, marking the slow, steady spread of colonies moving toward independence. "That," she said quietly, "depends on what kind of nation we choose to be. While everyone else is too busy watching an empire fall, to notice a small blue planet quietly growing stronger in the shadows." Outside her window, the stars burned on, indifferent as always to the slow, careful unraveling of an empire 2,000 years in the making, and to the small, patient nation, half a galaxy away, that had set that unraveling into motion, with nothing more than a stolen map and the simple, quiet truth it had always contained. 3 years passed. The Krillian Empire, once seen as an unshakable giant among the stars, no longer looked the way it had before. It had not vanished. It had not been destroyed in a single great battle. But it had changed, slowly and painfully, into something smaller and more honest than the empire that had ruled without question for 2,000 years. Nearly a third of the old border colonies had become fully independent nations, each one now governing itself, trading freely, and building its own small fleets for its own defense. Some of these new nations remained friendly with Krillis Prime, bound by old trade agreements and old family ties. Others had cut all ties completely, choosing instead to build new alliances with rising powers elsewhere in the galaxy, including, in a few quiet but important cases, with Earth itself. The empire that remained was still large, still powerful, still, in most practical measures, one of the strongest nations in known space. But it was no longer the same empire that had once looked at Earth as nothing more than children playing at being a civilization. It had been humbled, not by war, not by conquest, but by the slow, patient truth of its own weaknesses, laid bare for it to see, and by the choices, good and bad, that its people had made, once they knew that truth. Balak Ren, older now and more tired, but still serving faithfully as grand strategist, stood once again before the Emperor in the same chamber where, 3 years earlier, he had first shown him the falling line on the human graph. "The transition has stabilized, my Emperor," he reported. Farron's Reach and 11 other former colonies have signed new trade and defense agreements with the throne. We remain smaller than we were, but what remains is stronger, more honest, and far less likely to collapse further than the empire we governed 3 years ago. The Emperor, who had aged visibly in these 3 difficult years, nodded slowly. "And the human map?" he asked. "Has its purpose been served, or does it still hold secrets we have not yet uncovered?" Balak Ren hesitated before answering. This was a question that had haunted him for a long time. "I do not fully know, my Emperor," he admitted, "but I have come to believe something, over these 3 years, that I did not believe when this crisis first began. I do not believe the humans stole nothing, or gave us a weapon by accident. I believe, though I cannot prove it, that they allowed us to take exactly what we took, on purpose, knowing precisely what we would find inside it." The Emperor's ancient eyes sharpened with interest. "Explain." "The security we broke through was skilled, but not impossible for our best agent to overcome," Balak Ren said. "The data we took was complete, accurate, and far more detailed than a nation still guarding its most important secret should have allowed to slip away so cleanly. And in the years since, Whenever our people have quietly reached out through trade channels for information, for guidance, small pieces of useful help have appeared from unexpected and untraceable directions, exactly when we needed them most, and never in a way we could trace back to any single source. He paused. I believe, my Emperor, that Earth wanted us to see the truth about ourselves, and I believe they have been quietly helping guide us toward the better outcome the truth made possible, ever since. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, considering this. A small, weak nation, he finally said, guided the fate of the greatest empire in known space, without firing a single shot, without losing a single life of its own people, simply by showing us a mirror and letting our own choices do the rest. It would seem so, my Emperor. The Emperor let out a long, slow breath, something between a sigh and a bitter kind of laughter. We called them children, he said quietly, for 50 years. Since first we heard of them, we called the humans children, too young and too small to matter among the great powers of the stars. He looked out his window, toward the golden spires of a capital that had survived, changed but not broken, the hardest 3 years in its long history. Perhaps it is time we stopped making that mistake. On Earth, in the same quiet mountain facility, where the ascendancy model had first calculated the Empire's fall, Elena Reyes stood before the great humming banks of machines, now 3 years older, still running, still watching, still calculating the slow and patient rhythms of a galaxy full of rising and falling nations. She was not alone. Beside her stood Mara Lynn, grayer now but just as sharp-eyed as ever, and Director Kessler, who had, over the past 3 years, come to accept the strange and difficult work his small team had chosen to carry out, even if he had never fully stopped questioning whether it had been the right choice. New projections just finished running, Elena said, studying the latest report glowing on the screen before them. The Krillian Empire's decline has slowed significantly. It's not reversed entirely. Some level of continued change still seems likely over the coming decades. But the worst outcomes we were worried about 3 years ago, the long, bloody civil wars, the total collapse into chaos, those probabilities have dropped by more than half. And Earth? Mara asked, the same question she had asked many times over the past 3 years, watching the numbers change little by little with each new run of the model. Elena pulled up a second graph, one that had not existed 3 years earlier, a line representing a nation that had once been small and largely ignored among the great powers of the galaxy. That line, unlike the falling Krillian line from 3 years before, was rising, slowly, steadily, but unmistakably rising. We're being noticed now, Elena said, not just by the Krillians, by other powers, who watched what happened, and wondered how a nation as young and as small as ours managed to quietly influence the fate of the largest empire in the galaxy, without anyone even realizing it was happening, until it was already done. Some of them are curious. Some of them, frankly, are a little frightened of us now. Good, Mara said, with the faint trace of a smile. Fear, used carefully, can be a kind of protection. Nobody picks a fight with a small dog if they've heard rumors it bites harder than it looks. Director Kessler studied the rising line for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. We got lucky, he finally said. I want that said clearly. For the record, whatever record any of us are keeping of these last 3 years. We got lucky that the Krillian nobles who found the reform path more useful than the rebellion path happened to be numerous enough to matter. We got lucky that the worst leaders among the colonial governors weren't quite ambitious enough, or weren't quite ready enough, to plunge everything into all-out war. 100 small things could have gone differently, and if they had, we could be looking at a galaxy in flames right now, instead of a galaxy slowly, painfully finding a new and steadier balance. We didn't just get lucky, Mara said. We worked, every single day for 3 years, to help tip small moments in a better direction, whenever we had the chance to do so. Luck matters, Aaron. It always does. But so does patient, careful effort, applied again and again, even when the outcome is uncertain and the reward is far from guaranteed. Elena looked at both of them, then back at the 2 graphs glowing side by side on the screen before her, one still slowly falling, one steadily rising. 2 nations whose futures had become quietly and permanently tangled together by a single stolen map, and everything that had followed from it. What happens now? She asked. The same question that had hung over this entire project since the very first night, 3 years ago, when she had first seen the falling line and picked up the phone to call Mara Lynn down to her lab. Mara considered the question for a long moment, watching the rising line that represented her home, her people, her small and once overlooked nation among the vast and endless stars. Now, she said, we keep watching. We keep learning, and when the next falling line appears somewhere else in this model, for some other nation, at some other time, we decide, once again, whether Earth is the kind of nation that looks away, or the kind of nation that finds a quiet, careful way to help. Far above them, in orbit around a small blue and green planet that had once been dismissed as the home of children playing at being a civilization, human ships moved quietly among the stars, no longer as unnoticed as they once had been, no longer quite as small in the eyes of the galaxy's older and more powerful nations. The Krillian Empire, humbled but not broken, continued its long, careful work of rebuilding itself into something more honest than it had been before. Governor Vosh of Farron's Reach, now the respected leader of a small but stable independent nation, kept in her private study a single framed copy of an old report, one of the earliest anonymous pieces of trade guidance that had helped her young colony survive its most dangerous early years, a report she had never been able to trace back to its true source, though she had long suspected, without any solid proof, that the trail led back to a certain small blue planet, many light years from her own world. And deep beneath a quiet mountain on Earth, the Ascendancy model continued its endless, patient work, watching the slow rise and fall of nations across the wide and crowded galaxy, waiting, as it always did, for the next falling line to appear on its screens, and for the next quiet decision about what, if anything, a small and growing nation called Earth would choose to do about it. The stars above continued burning, as they always had, indifferent to empires and to children alike. But among those stars, one small nation, once easily dismissed, and now quietly respected, had learned something that would shape its path for generations to come. That the greatest power in the galaxy was not always the power of fleets or fortunes or ancient thrones. Sometimes, the greatest power of all was simply understanding the truth a little sooner than everyone else, and having the patience and the courage to use that understanding wisely. Earth had stolen nothing from anyone. It had simply let a secret map fall into the right hands at exactly the right moment, and had trusted the truth, carefully placed and patiently guided, to do the rest. It had worked far better, and far more quietly, than any fleet of warships ever could have.